This is Jewish Spotlight, a weekly television program presented by Chabad Lubavitch of Long Island, featuring various aspects of modern Jewish life and Jewish culture. Now, here is your host, Rabbi Tuvia Teldin.
Shalom. Welcome to the Jewish Spotlight. This year, a lot of organizations, magazines, people from all over are wondering, who is the person of the century, the person of the millennium? And in the Jewish world also, we can ask ourselves this question, and I don't think that too many people will have a doubt as to the answer. Because when we talk about this century, it's been a century for the Jewish people of unbelievable contrast, going from literally poverty of Europe through a literal oven of hell in Europe, and then of course to salvation here in America and throughout the world where Jews went in order to be able to literally spare their lives, until of course the flourishing communities that have grown in the Jewish world, not only here in the States, but literally throughout the globe. One person in the last 50 years has been the driving force behind so much of this growth, behind motivating and bringing out in such a tremendous, forceful way the drive for not only Jewish survival, but for Judaism to be able to flourish in a very deep and positive way, with roots that could last for another 1,000 years, if need be, until Mashiach will come. That person, without any question, is the Lubavitcher Rebbe. The Rebbe who came to this country in the 40s, and of course, under the guidance of his father-in-law, who was the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, served diligently in order to make sure that the previous Rebbe's transition to this country and the growth of his programs would be able to bear fruit in a tremendous way. But in 1950, when the previous Rebbe passed away, it was a whole new world for the world of Lubavitch, which at that time was quite small. And we have with us somebody today who has dedicated his life to spreading the teachers of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, to be able to share his wisdom, to be able to help people from all walks of life understand better what exactly was the makeup of this so unique a leader, so gifted a person, such a gift from God that we are still to this day very, very grateful to the Almighty for. I want to welcome Rabbi Jacobson, who is the author of Towards a Meaningful Life and the director for the Meaningful Life Center, to the Jewish Spotlight. Rabbi Jacobson, it's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you very much.
I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to share with us, and I'd like to start off by asking you the following question. Let's set a little bit of the scenario. It's 1950. 5 years ago, the Jewish world was literally decimated, from 6 million of our people being lost to an enemy in Germany, and of course throughout much of Eastern Europe and other countries. Let's set the scene for how the Rebbe saw the challenge at that point, and how he was able to focus, and we can look back on it now, focus then on being able to take the Jewish people step by step to develop a beautiful future.
Well, 1950 was probably one of the saddest chapters in Jewish history, and I'm sure many thinkers and historians all wrote the obituary of the Jewish people at that point, because 6 million of the best, the Jews, a third of the people, and some of entire communities, Jewish, committed scholars, pious men, women, children, were literally annihilated in Europe. So besides the physical loss of so many lives, the demoralization of the survivors must have been devastating. With the hope, was there any hope? Now, literally, you're dealing with refugees that were scattered all over Europe, trying to find, where do they go?
Right.
No homes, no communities, no money. And the United States, of course, was a haven. But even those that were coming over to this country didn't know the language, didn't have a livelihood, didn't have the strength to begin anew, and particularly most were just survivors of families, maybe single survivors of families that were completely decimated. So I don't even know if there are words to describe the sense of hopelessness and despair.
The Rebbe's insight. How did the Rebbe take all this? Of course, as a leader, he could have said, well, listen, we have a terrible situation. We might as well give up before we even try to do anything. This is an impossible challenge. But the Rebbe, of course, did not take that attitude. What did the Rebbe, from his teachings at that point out as far as what kind of leader we were dealing with for the Jewish people at that time?
Okay, so let's just paint the picture. So the Rebbe comes to the United States in 1941. He is designated by his father-in-law, the previous Rebbe, Rabbi Joseph Isaac Schneerson, to head the three main branches of what Lubavitch Power was at the time. The three organizations: one is educational arm, one is a social arm, one is a publication arm. And the Rebbe, in 1950, and the passing of his father-in-law, assumes the leadership.
Right, so right now, really, we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of the assumption of that leadership. That's why this is such a major milestone, not only, of course, in Lubavitch, but also for the Jewish world at large, to take note of what the real message of that is 50 years afterwards and how much has been accomplished.
Exactly. So in 1950, the Rebbe here is dealing with essentially his own community of refugees who were just beginning to perhaps build families, beginning to find a place in the United States because they settled in New York.
Which at that time numbered approximately how many?
In 1950, I would say not more than 400 or 500 families.
So the whole Lubavitch community at that time was 400 or 500 families. Okay, continue.
Essentially, I mean, they were scattered all
of course,
over.
I
There was
understand.
Israel, there was
Right.
France, there was Europe.
Right,
But the Rebbe has to build something literally out of scratch,
right.
because organizations don't exist. Schools are barely, getting rooted. His father-in-law did establish the main Lubavitch school here, and the Rebbe is dealing with both psychological challenges, monetary ones, and of course, most importantly, spiritual ones. We're not even talking about the entire Jewish people as a
Right.
whole,
Mhm.
who were at a loss. And the Rebbe, in a very methodical way that we can only see now, wisdom in retrospect, began to put the plan in place. You could see his master plan. First of all, infusing that hope that we do have the power, that we're not just survivors of a Holocaust, we're not just survivors of a pogroms, but we are given a God-given mission. In his first statement in 1950, if you read his talk, and that he delivered in 1950 upon assuming leadership, he made a statement which was so powerful. He said that, it wasn't just a question of being on the defensive, it was an offensive.
Mm-hmm.
That we have a generation, we are the seventh generation, the Rebbe spelled out, meaning seventh generation from the Lubavitch movement, the dynasty. Our job is to accomplish something. And he explained what it was. He says to bring godliness into this world, to reach out and spread the words of Torah, the eternal message of hope, to people not only in New York, not only in the United States, but all over the world. And there's no time more necessary to have that type of message spread than now, because Jews were suffering both from post-Holocaust, but in general, a general assimilation and weakness in faith and in spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And he made that statement to a handful of a few hundred people. People were amazed that the Rebbe could speak that way.
I remember speaking to somebody who was in that audience, and they were looking at the Rebbe like they had no idea how the Rebbe could talk like this. Here we were literally survivors of the most terrible Holocaust that existed. The Rebbe is talking about spreading Yiddishkeit throughout the world.
Global.
Exactly. They had no idea where this was coming from or where it was going to be going to.
Yeah, now no one is surprised, but that's what makes a visionary a visionary. And that's why a Rebbe is not like you and I. A Rebbe has not just the confidence, but the ability to lay out a blueprint for people who don't have the vision to know how to implement it. And
Right.
he began by, first of all, establishing certain organizations, whether schools. He established an organization for women. The Rebbe understood and foresight recognized the power and the necessary role that women would have to play as leadership
Mm-hmm.
in the coming, so to
Right.
speak, spiritual revolution. He established it not just in the United States, but in Israel. He began to, in a sense, reinforce and mobilize the army, which were his Hasidim, his followers, all over the world.
Mhm.
He just said, do not come to New York. We're not creating another little shtetl here. Stay where you are. We have a job to do, whether we're Australia, North Africa, South Africa, Israel.
Not only stay where you
Europe.
are, but he took people who were living in Brooklyn and sent them out.
Exactly. And a process began, which, as I say, in retrospect, you see, you can connect the dots. At the time, it was a bunch of little events. He was laying out the groundwork, laying out the foundation of educating a generation. In the late 50s, the Rebbe came out with a call called Ufaratzta, which was a call to spread out.
Mhm.
God's promise to Jacob that you will spread to the east and to the west, to the north and to the south, with the message of Judaism, the universal light of Torah, to Jews all over the world, to people all over the world.
Right.
And the Rebbe established what is called today in the lingo of Chabad, shlichus, the concept of shlichus, which means literally mission. That giving people emissaries of his own, to go to all kinds of cities, countries, that may have been completely devoid of any type of Jewish presence.
Right, which back in the 50s, I believe there may be about 40 or 50 people who went out during the whole decade.
Right.
And of course, things have changed tremendously. But tell our viewers also what happened in the 60s with the revolution that was going on here in America, the Cultural Revolution. How the Rebbe, again, with his vision, was able to analyze the tremendous rebellion that took place amongst youth at that time. He wasn't of those who were against it and who tried to stamp it out, but to the contrary, he had a very, very different reaction, which I think attracted many people also to the Rebbe at that time.
Well, the Rebbe recognized early on, in the late 50s, he said there will be restlessness, especially particularly among the youth. And the Rebbe identified that restlessness not as a criminal or negative thing, but as the soul, the fire of the soul of a young generation that refuses to just be satisfied with the materialism of their parents, refuses to be satisfied with the status quo, that there will be a rebelliousness and a revolution, which is exactly what happened. And the Rebbe pointed out and said, the revolution is very healthy. However, it needs to be channeled into a spiritual revolution. You see, the revolution opened up doors that can get cut through the conformity that existed, they say, in the 50s of the man in the gray flannel suit type of mentality. And the 60s opened up new avenues. Young people did not necessarily buy into the establishment and
status quo
and conventional approach to things. And the Rebbe saw that as an unbelievable opportunity to get young people to perhaps look at their Judaism in a new way. You know?
Which thousands began to do.
Exactly. And the Rebbe in 67 came out with the mitzvah, the campaign to put on the Tefillin campaign, particularly after the 6-day war in Israel, where the Kotel, the Western Wall was opened once again for the Jewish people. It was a very deep awakening among Jews all over the world. People went to the Kotel, started putting on tefillin for the first time, keeping the Sabbath and doing other mitzvot.
Right.
I think there was that famous photo of Bob Dylan at the Kotel putting on tefillin.
Really?
And this was unheard of in the 50s, because in the 50s, if you were born into a home that did not keep mitzvot, that's essentially where you were stuck. But the 60s opened up a whole new confusion in a healthy way of boundaries, where people began to say, well, who says just because everyone's doing it that way, that's what I have to do?
Right.
And the Rebbe saw that as a very unbelievable opportunity. He then initiated a very aggressive campaign on college campuses and to reach the young people, who were, of course, rebelling in many ways that were also, of course, self-destructive. But the Rebbe saw it as the opportunity to channel it to spiritual growth and spiritual revolution. And literally thousands and thousands of young men and women, Jews, were influenced by that campaign to begin to look at Judaism in a new way. And you see their fruits today, their children and grandchildren of those, so to speak, Balei Tshuva, they call them. Even though I don't know about that word itself, it means essentially a Jew who may not have been grew up with something, may have been grown up in an assimilated environment and embraced Judaism in a deeper way sometime point in their lives.
But I find also that the interesting point in this is, at the time that the Rebbe began this process, he was criticized tremendously for not only sending his young rabbis and Rebbetzins, the young couples with young children, out to places that had no support system whatsoever, but in addition, of course, just the idea of going out there and trying to help people relate to their Judaism on such a large scale was considered to be a very risky business. Because of its success, though, not only Lubavitch flourished, but there, of course, became a flood of other organizations that wanted to imitate Lubavitch in order to be able to do the same thing, which the Rebbe was very happy about. He was not looking to have an exclusive on the process of trying to elevate the educational level of Jews throughout the world. And of course, it became a tremendous movement of many organizations.
Well, every visionary is a lonely space, a lonely person. Because a visionary means that he has the vision to see things far beyond that the community or the group sees. It's a bird's eye view. And you talk about the 60s. The Rebbe, in retrospect, and I've studied this now looking back, I think it was, you look at each decade, he really had a response to that particular decade, and it really was a strategy that opened up from just building from the bare remnants after the Holocaust in the 50s into a broader campaign to reach Jews that may have been alienated from their roots in the 60s. In the 70s, it turned even beyond that, became much broader with the Rebbe's 10-point mitzvah campaign, mitzvah tanks that you see now in New York and other major centers. And in the 80s, it really became global, literally global,
But
reaching to the entire world.
Before we go to the 80s, what I want to do is we talk about the Rebbe, but a lot of people out there have never seen the Rebbe. They don't know what the Rebbe looks like. They have no real sense of the excitement that the Rebbe was able to almost contagiously invest in another person. So I want to take out 1 minute and give everybody a chance to see the Rebbe on the video so we have a sense of who the Rebbe was as a person, his relationship with the people who he dealt with, how giving, how totally selfless he was in his service of the Jewish people. So let's take out a minute and take a look. We'll be right back.
Not wieder Malmed und Matzev soll nicht sein, darf man sehen, wo nur sie da ein jüdisches Kind soll sitzen und lernen Teile. Und viel, als sie da der, was ist, ein Reich von Sanhedrin, wo das sie gewähren, Mordche hat Zadig bis Manne. Wo sieben seinen gestanden, dämmelt in Asami Malmed und Matzev, wo Schlichijere hat sich gedacht, abgeben seine ganze Zeit, auf Hatzolas Am Yisrael und Sanaskan Ziburi nicht Chas V'Sholem in einer kleinen Kehille oder in einer Stadt, nur sein Askonis Ziburi se sich mispaschet al Kol Oelam Kule. Als machen an Asif und halten a Rede und wer dann noch sehen, aber soll das so drucken in die Zeitung gehen. Es ist auch nicht auch in größere Sache, was kann auftan von der Welt. Der Zelt der Megillah als Ibchim ist aber. Und das, was geworden der Venapechu, ist Ikre Shelnes und Tekve Shelnes bestanden in dem, was Mordche hat sich nicht gesucht, die Ruzim, als ist ein größer Rosh Hashive. Steht ihm nicht an, haben zu tun mit kleinen Kindern. Und das, was ein größer Raskan Ziburi, was sich vernehmen, mit der Talmud-Teire und mit der kleinen Besefer und mit der Nekeschel bis Rabon. Ist ein größer Mensch und an dem hängt auf die ganze Welt. Wo das ist echt eine Ablernung bei Negel, Lechaye, Jem, als ist einen vernommen. Und was ist mit Tumulten wegen einer Linie von Kindern, von kleinen Kindern. Als Drufe genug, aber soll reden mit seinem Schatten.
That's just a short glimpse of a very, very incredible person who, for me personally, to be in the Rebbe's presence, as for literally hundreds of thousands of other Jews, was a truly enthralling experience. But now I want to shoot forward and fast forward back to the 90s. And Rabbi Jacobson, author of Towards a Meaningful Life, director of the Meaningful Life Center, give us a little bit of a view of Lubavitch now. 1990s, we're talking about a situation. Unfortunately, of course, Gimel Tammuz, the Rebbe's soul rose to heaven, or to wherever the soul of a great tzaddik goes to. I'm sure that it looks upon us and continues to in different ways supplicate for the Jewish people, as the Jewish people believe in the power of a tzaddik, of a very righteous person, even after his death. But let's talk about Lubavitch in the world today. We have a movement that is literally the largest Jewish organization the world has ever seen. And how do you, as a person who travels around many different places, sees the effect that the Chabad rabbis have, sees how the Rebbe's knowledge and the Rebbe's teachings are able to literally transform communities? How do you see Lubavitch at 50 years old?
Well, as opposed to many wrong predictions, it only continues to grow. Many people ask me, so now that the Rebbe is physically not here, how is it continuing to grow? And I explain very simply, because the Rebbe is not a CEO of a company. The Rebbe is a spiritual leader. I'm a spiritual visionary, and the spiritual message, a Torah message, is eternal. And you see it in the young people that continue to go to the forest communities. I only see an unbelievable growth. It's now 5 years since the Rebbe's passing. So it's 50 years from when we began, 1950. 50
Right.
years later. 50 years later, the force and the power of the Rebbe's influence is greater than ever in my mind.
Oh, definitely.
I see it wherever I go. You travel, you see the appreciation of the Rebbe's teachings, appreciation of the Rebbe's institutions that he established, and most importantly of all, the Rebbe's emissaries that are all leaders in their own right. You go to any city, major city, minor city in the country, you have a student who is really a leader in the community. He's either running a day school or a soup kitchen, or he's running a large school of 1,000 children.
You remind me of a beautiful saying from the Rebbe. The Rebbe was once asked about his followers. So he said, I'm not looking for followers. I'm looking to make leaders. And which was very true.
correct. And any true leader can accomplish that because he's empowering his people, his students, disciples, with the tools with which to teach others. And that you see very obvious, that you see the growth, the thriving growth, wherever you may go. And so though there's a certain sadness related to the fact that physically we cannot see the Rebbe, we cannot relate to him, we can't go to New York and visit him, but yet the power that he has infused in these students of his is simply enormous.
It's amazing
and continues
also.
to spread.
Yes, definitely. Right now, of course, there are how many Chabad houses all over the world? Maybe 2,500 or so, which is far beyond any other organization could possibly dream of. But the amazing thing that I find is that people that are here in the New York metropolitan area don't perhaps truly appreciate the length and breadth of the influence that Rebbe has throughout the world. It's only when you perhaps leave New York City or go to other places and travel to some of the far-flung Jewish communities of the world, whether it be Shanghai, whether it be places in Texas, places in every corner of the globe, and realize that this is one individual, one Rebbe, who had the vision and literally inspired young people from a very young age to voluntarily even go to Siberia, to move to Siberia, to be able to set up shop, so to say, in order to be able to offer whatever was needed for any Jew of any background, of any financial situation, of any age, regardless of what they were able to do for that person, they would do it. And it's an amazing, amazing accomplishment.
Well, there was once a writer, an Israeli writer, who was a liberal writer. He had no particular respect necessarily for religious Jews, but he once spent a Simchas Torah, the holiday season, the celebration, and with the Rebbe and his in 770 Eastern Parkway, which is the main headquarters of Lubavitch. And he wrote an article later saying that the many young people there, which was majority were young people, showed him that there was a real future here. This wasn't like many synagogues where you see only the older people coming, the next generation does not return. He saw the future there. See, the Rebbe infused young people with passion, with a cause.
Exactly.
That there's a real cause, there's a real battle to be fought. Obviously, it's a battle of light, not a battle of darkness, it's a battle of light, of spreading light. Basically, a search and a hunger for the soul, for spirit, for a Judaism that is personally relevant and helps people really embrace their tradition, is the committed mission and passion of all these young people that you're mentioning.
Right, which I think ties very much into your book and the Meaningful Life Center, because what you've done with that is really to encapsulate to a certain degree the one of the main driving messages of the Rebbe and the way that the Rebbe inspired so many hundreds of thousands of people, in particular the thousands of shluchim, of emissaries that he sent out, to feel that tremendously deep sense of purpose and to be able to share it with people, sometimes a great self-sacrifice, which is a very rare quality to be able to not only have, but also to be able to instill in others.
And the interesting thing is that it is, in a way, contagious. It's like a flame that lights a flame that lights another flame. The Rebbe was very fond of saying the concept of shliach oisa shliach, that one emissary creates another.
Right.
See, the Rebbe was not, it was the 2,500 are, so to speak, the formal emissaries that actually, but the point is that each one of those 2,500 should inspire their particular communities. Every individual, man, woman, and child, has to become a shliach of his own. Is also an emissary, because God put us all here on this earth.
Right.
So in a way, it's all really like the Rebbe's direct emissaries are really awakening everyone else to the mission that they too have. So this isn't an exclusive or elitist type of
Right, exactly.
approach.
But
It's
you're bringing up another topic, or at least it pushes a couple of buttons with me, that of course, even though we have such a tremendous network, there's a tremendous, call it hesitancy, or call it misconceptions, call it fear in some cases, call it seeing a beard and a hat, or whatever it might be. People hear the word Lubavitch, there's a certain mystery about it that people will withdraw a little bit. I find that in most cases, once a person has actually met on a personal level another Lubavitcher who has related to them on a person-to-person basis, and they realize that Lubavitchers are people like everybody else. We just happen to have had the schus, the merit of having been under the influence of the Rebbe and been able to draw from his wisdom and his teachings. So then a lot of the misconceptions melt away automatically. But until that point, and I'm sure you deal with this all the time, there's a constant, almost a sense of insecurity or whatever it is. How do you confront it? How do you deal with it? How do you see it?
Well, it's an extremely important point. It's called stereotyping in English.
Okay, right. Let's
people,
boil it down to one word.
The stereotyping, and the unfortunate fact is that often it's for good reason. Because many Jews today
Interesting.
have fear and resistance because they've experienced Judaism as being something that was dogmatic, shoved down their throat, angry, wrathful God, punishment, it's guilt, neurosis.
Yeah.
You know, every negative adjective has been used around religion.
Right.
And the truth is that much of their exposure is that's exactly the way it was, either at home
Right.
or in school or in the synagogue. You go into some synagogues and it has that type of emptiness.
Right, and what the Rebbe was doing was really lifting us
Precisely.
beyond that in
So
order to
I
be
deal
able
with
to see
this.
it.
However, there is the stereotype. They see someone with a beard and a yarmulke, there's a resistance.
Right.
So maybe that's one of the advantages of radio over television, that you don't see the face. However, I think that intelligent people can be challenged head on and say, you don't like to be stereotyped, don't stereotype me.
Right.
People say to me, don't impose upon me your misconceptions, but
Yeah.
they are sometimes very deep. The only way to answer that is the Rebbe's words. Words from the
Right.
heart enter the heart.
Right.
That's the antidote to stereotypes.
All right. Rabbi Jacobson, thank you very much. I often joke with people also, if a UFO would land tomorrow and teach the Rebbe's Torah and reteach the lessons of Chassidus without all the stereotypes and the baggage from beforehand, everybody would love it. They would go for it without a problem. In the meantime, though, on a serious note, and I want to thank you very much for being with us for the show. It was very interesting. The fact is that the Rebbe, as a leader, was somebody who inspired millions of people, Jew and non-Jew alike, with a teaching that just broke through so many stereotypes and was able to, in fact, give a sense of the purpose, of the beauty, of the means by which we are all able to connect to God. And truly, there was and is a gift to this world that until we start to break through the surface and find out what his teachings are all about, we're not able to truly appreciate it in a great degree. And that's the reason why it's something worth not only picking up, of course, Rabbi Jacobson's book, but also, of course, being able to learn in any way, check into your Chabad Center, find out what these teachings of the Rebbe are all about. And this will hopefully be able to open your mind up to a teaching of an individual who had a tremendous effect on our world. And as a result, I think it's something that you would all be able to benefit from greatly. Meantime, I just want to put on Rabbi Jacobson's phone number also. If anybody would have any questions at all or want to pursue anything about the teachings of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, it's a wonderful person to be able to find out about. His number, of course, is 718-774-6448. That's 774-6448. In the meantime, from the Jewish Spotlight, I want to thank you for being with us, of course, and do yourself a favor. Check into your local Chabad house. Find out who this great, great rabbi was and is, and how much it can mean to your life and to the life of your children. Take care, and we'll see you next week at the Jewish Spotlight. Shalom.